So hello and welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar. My name is Sam Constance. I work with the Alumni Career Development team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. And I'm new to the alumni team, and I look forward to getting to know the vibrant University of Chicago alumni community, each one of you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled 4 Steps to Becoming an Effective Mentor. Today we'll hear from alumna Olivia Liddell. Olivia is a technical curriculum developer at Amazon Web Services. She has a master's degree in Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago and a bachelor's degree from New York University. Over the course of her career, Olivia has created innovative teaching and technical training solutions for learners from diverse backgrounds and skill levels. She taught middle school Arabic in Chicago Public Schools and has developed several web applications for Arabic language learners. Olivia is an internationally renowned keynote speaker. A certified ethical hacker, she frequently speaks at tech conferences on topics such as social engineering and how to use human hacking techniques to improve communication skills, lead change management efforts, and foster team building initiatives. You can find her online at www.olivialiddell.com. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Olivia.
Hey, thank you so much, Sam, and thank you all for being here today. Let me just get my screen pulled up here. And this talk about mentoring is one of my favorite ones to present because of how mentoring has personally helped me throughout my career. I know when I first started and earlier in my career, I just felt very lost. And unfortunately, I had the guidance of many people who've helped me along the way. And now being able to mentor others, I thought, why not put together a talk that can help people who are looking to get started with mentoring or perhaps have some experience but aren't quite sure how to finesse that. So just to give you a little bit of an overview following what Sam already mentioned, I'm a technical curriculum developer at Amazon Web Services. I develop training courses for people who are looking to get certified in our various cloud computing areas. And it's really rewarding to be able to use what I've learned throughout various parts of my career from teaching technology and help others advance with that part of their certification journey. Graduated from the University of Chicago. I was just going to say I just recently graduated, but I realized that was 12 years ago now. Time has flown by, but what I've learned through the Middle Eastern Studies program helped me to become a teacher in Chicago Public Schools, teaching middle school Arabic for a few years. And it was actually through that teacher residency program that I learned a lot about mentoring, and you'll see a lot of that rolled into this presentation today. I spent a full year under the guidance of a mentor teacher who helped coach me, helped me see how to develop into a better educator, and all of those things I carry into my career today. So if you hear me talk a lot about teaching, that's where all of that is coming from. Here's what we're going to cover today in these 4 main areas. We're going to start with how to identify some strengths that you could potentially offer as a mentor, then transition into building those mentoring relationships at work. For that second part, we're actually going to split it into 2 areas, talking about formal mentoring versus informal, what some of those differences are, and also giving you guidance as to how to begin implementing that into your workplace. Then we'll talk about communication, how you can improve your communication skills if that's something that you feel that you might be struggling with. And the last part would be how to overcome some common fears that are related to mentoring. I know for myself personally, I've had many reasons why I have not wanted to do mentoring at different points in life, and I've put those together in a way that I think will help you be able to have some quick, actionable strategies for moving forward. Sam, would you mind launching the first poll? As she's pulling that up, you should soon see the first poll coming up on your screen. I was curious to get a sense of, there it is. So of all the topics that we're covering today on this agenda, let's see if I can see it on my screen here. I just saw it. Which topic are you most interested in learning about? So you may be interested in all of them, but take just a couple seconds and cast your vote, and that's going to be really helpful for me to know. And then once the votes have come in, Sam will let me, or she'll let all of us know what those results are.
Wonderful. Yes. So we do have some votes rolling in here. It looks like the highest percentage, about 38% of our attendees, are most interested in learning about building mentoring relationships at work.
Mm,
About 35 are interested in identifying strengths that you can offer as a mentor. 24% are interested in improving your communication skills as a mentor. And then coming in dead last with 3%, overcoming common fears related to mentoring.
Okay, thanks so much, Sam. And again, thank you all for taking the time to vote there. It's really helpful for me to get a sense of which content you're most interested in seeing. We're going to cover all of it, but again, it's helpful for me to hear. So we're going to start here with this question. What is the origin of the word mentor? It's a very UChicago way of starting things off, I know. But I'm starting here because as I was developing this talk, this is something that I actually stumbled upon accidentally. I was doing research and I came across this article that happened to mention it, and it was very eye-opening to me. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but the origin of the word mentor comes from the Odyssey. So I'm going to give you a very quick recap of the Odyssey for any of you who aren't familiar with it. This is Olivia's version of the Odyssey, for better or worse. The Odyssey, Homer's epic Greek poem. You have the main character, Odysseus, who's the king of Ithaca. And one day he's about to go off and fight in the Trojan War. He's going to be away from home for a while. Now, Odysseus has this son named Telemachus, and he wants to make sure that while he's out fighting in the war, that his son is taken care of and has someone to look out for him. So before Odysseus heads out, he calls up a friend of his and says, hey, I'm about to go off to war, but my kid is still here at home, and I just want to make sure that he's got someone who can help guide him and coach him and look out for him. Would you mind doing that for me? Like, do me a solid favor while I'm gone? And his friend says, sure, no problem. And the name of the friend was Mentor. Ta-da. So that was really eye-opening for me because for a number of reasons. One being it shows that this idea, this concept of mentoring is something that has been around for a very long time. But also, if you get into reading the Odyssey and see examples of how this plays out, you can see some parallels as to how mentoring in the Odyssey can be applied to mentoring in today's workplace. A question that, or a statement that I'd like you to think of as we're getting started for your own purposes of learning today. An effective mentor is someone who, dot, dot, dot. And if you can fill in the blanks with that in your own mind. When I've presented this talk before, I would have us do like an interactive word cloud, but for the sake of time, just take a quick second to think for yourself from your own experiences with being a mentor or from your own experiences with being a mentee. How would you define this for yourself?
And Olivia, while they're thinking about that, would you mind just pulling your screen back up? It looks like we're still on the poll slide from what
Oh,
I can
really?
see.
Ooh, okay. Let me unshare the screen and go back. Are you seeing this now?
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So in case you didn't see the other slide that I had before, it was this little one of the Odyssey right there, some little Greek fun that we had. So an effective mentor is someone who, and when you think about this, some of the ways that you might choose to respond to this would be what you see here in this word cloud. I like to start here because when I often speak with people about getting into mentoring or improving their skills as a mentor, one of the most common things they tell me is, Olivia, I'm kind of scared because I feel that if I want to be a good mentor, it means that I have to be all of this. It means that I'm being like a life coach for someone and being responsible for all these things. And that can be very overwhelming. And I completely agree that when someone comes to you and becomes your mentee, you sometimes feel that you have to take ownership of all of these things. Now, what I would encourage you to do instead is to look at this and think about how you chose to fill in that blank for yourself. And today, start with maybe no more than one or two of these things that you want to focus on improving. So, for example, as we're going through the different topics today, think about how can I become a better mentor who is more consistent? Or how can I become a better mentor in terms of being trustworthy and so forth? So that's my first recommendation. just as we're getting started, start small. And when these slides are shared out later on, you can feel free to come back to this slide with the word cloud in case you are looking for other ways to get creative with mentoring and think, well, now that I've got consistency and trustworthiness down pretty good, what can I do next? Okay, so our first area, our first strategy is going to be identifying skills and strengths that are specific. The reason we're starting here is that often with mentoring, sometimes people get into it and think, okay, I want to be a mentor. I want to help people. And that's great, but you need to think about what can you specifically offer to someone else? What's the value that you are bringing to the table that a potential mentee would be able to learn from you? Thinking about, I know often the term personal brand gets tossed around a lot, but I think that's very relevant here in terms of being able to identify and assess what specifically you can offer as a mentor. I know this can sometimes be a challenging thing when you're trying to figure out, well, what can I offer? And the good news is that we actually have quite a few examples of this in our pop culture, such as the show Shark Tank, which I watch way too often. If you've never seen Shark Tank before, it's a show where people who have possible business ideas and business ventures come on to make a quick pitch. They usually have a product that they have tested out before, and now they're trying to convince some of these sharks that you see here, or these investors, to invest into their business. Now, with this being TV, oftentimes it's very sensationalized, and what gets a lot more attention is, will they make the big sale and will they get someone to invest this amount of money? But from a mentoring standpoint, what I really love about Shark Tank is what happens behind the scenes and when it comes to this ongoing mentoring relationship. Because when you are someone who's coming onto this show and you're trying to convince one of these sharks to invest in your product, it's not just about the money part of it. You're also having to make a choice as to who you are going to trust the most to give you ongoing business advice. You need to think which of these people really has the experience, the skill set, the mindset that most aligns with what I'm trying to do. To give you an example of this, Mark Cuban in the middle here, he's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. So usually whenever there's someone who comes onto the show and they have some kind of product that's related to sports, they tend to gravitate towards him. Lori over here, she has a lot of products that are on QVC, Home Shopping Network. So you can kind of, it's really easy to see like, oh, this person has this product, it goes to them, it goes to that person. But that's exactly how I would encourage you to think about mentoring. I was joking with some of my software development friends recently, and I said, you kind of want to be the Mark Cuban of unit testing, and knowing what it is that you are good at and really positioning yourself as an expert who can do this. Now, if you're not sure of what your strengths are and what it is that you could be known for, this reflected best self exercise is something that I highly recommend taking the time to do. If you've never done it before, it's a very simple process. The way it starts is that you select 3 to 5 people that you're going to ask for feedback, asking them to respond to this statement: I am at my best when fill in the blank. So it's almost like you're asking them to write almost like a letter of recommendation about when they feel that you have been at your best. And for the best results here, I would encourage you to choose people who've known you at various points of your career. So don't choose all of your current coworkers. Try to get some people from earlier on too, if possible. The other part is, don't choose people just because they only tell you the good things about yourself, but you want someone who can really be honest and candid and maybe give you insight into a part of yourself that you might not have considered was a good thing. Once you get these responses back, identify the patterns and see what some of those commonalities are. And the last part would be compose your self-portrait. I don't mean you have to paint, don't worry, but it's more so a way of being able to take this feedback that you have been given and see how you can flip that and start to own some of those traits and reposition yourself as how you present what your strengths are. Fun story about this. A couple years ago, I did this, and one of my friends came to me and said, "You know, Olivia, you're really good at public speaking. You should do that." And I thought, no, what are you talking about? Like, I'm terrified of that. I've never public speaking. And so a couple days later, I went to another friend and I said, "Guess what? You're gonna laugh at this. So and so said I'm good at public speaking. Isn't that so funny?" And the second friend said, "No, she's right, and you should do that." And at first I thought, I need better friends, but I realized that if multiple people are saying the same thing about you, it's a really great way to be able to incorporate that into how you are positioning yourself and what you can do for mentoring. In addition to that, some other questions that you might want to consider would be, when in your career did you make a mistake and learn from it? I know sometimes I really don't want to reflect back on things that went wrong, but from a mentoring standpoint, some of the best mentoring conversations and growth opportunities can come from having a mentor who has gone through some of these mistakes and done things wrong. But the difference is that they've made a mistake and they've learned from it, and now they're able to help newer members of their team figure out how to identify those spots so that they don't have to go through the same thing. Also, what's something you might have struggled with at the beginning of your career? Again, I know it can be tough to dig back and relive some of those memories, but to give you an example, something that I personally struggled with earlier in my career was time management, not in the sense of like showing up late to work or anything like that, but time management in teaching specifically. Uh, During my teacher residency year, there's this one time when I was supposed to teach a quick lesson to my classroom of third graders. It was supposed to be like a 5 minute multiplication lesson, teach them for 5 minutes, and then they go off and do their group work. And I was teaching the lesson. It was going really well. I was in the zone, and I'm thinking these kids are learning. It's wonderful. And then once it was over, I realized that I had been talking for 40 minutes. I have no idea how those kids sat still for 40 minutes when it's supposed to be 5. But now that I have learned from that, at my point now in my career, one of the things that I mentor people on when they're getting into public speaking is time management. And so this is something that I was able to take a negative and turn it into a positive in that way. And the last question I would consider here is we're talking about strengths. If you could go back to the beginning of your career, what's something that you might consider doing differently? And there's no right or wrong here. I just encourage you to think about this as a way of seeing, well, okay, if you could go back in time and putting yourself in the shoes of someone who is earlier in their career, is there something that you can possibly identify from your own career path that can help you identify something that became a strength that you can now coach someone on? So now that you've identified strengths, the next part of this, the second strategy, we're getting into this discussion of informal versus formal mentoring. And this section is split into, it's a strategy that's twofold. So as we're jumping into this, I want to give you a quick breakdown of some of the main ways that you can identify whether a mentoring approach is more informal or formal. Starting with informal. This tends to be where mentors and mentees self-select. There's no kind of formal matching process. This can be something where you have a junior member of a team who decides, hey, so and so, who's a couple levels above me, seems to be really knowledgeable in this area. Why don't we try to pair up and have some mentoring conversations? I have also found mentors just from having been in an office setting where I made breakfast at the same time as someone else, and we just kind of hit it off the conversation over time. And before you know it, you've got mentoring that's happening there. Is it formal? No. But did we get a lot of value out of that? Absolutely. With informal mentoring, you also tend to see that goals are not specified. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes people look at that and think, "Ooh, you don't have goals." But when you think about informal mentoring, you're having these mentoring discussions and conversations without it needing to be formally tracked like you would in more of a formal context, which we'll get to next. And the same thing with outcomes, they're usually not tracked or measured. So when you're thinking about which approach you may want or which may seem to be the best fit for you, just keep those things in mind. On the other side, Formal is where mentors and mentees usually tend to be paired based on some compatibility. I've seen this happen before based on things like career pathing, communication styles, possibly if someone is looking to be paired with a counterpart who's in a different department. There's usually some thought and rationale that goes into this kind of pairing that's there. It's very intentional. Along those lines, with formal mentoring, you're definitely going to have some goals that are established, and we'll talk about that momentarily, how that looks. Also, outcomes almost always are tracked and measured. So if you're in some kind of mentoring program where usually with human resources is involved with that, that's almost always going to be a formal thing, and it's very essential for you to have goals and outcomes to have that formality and see exactly the value of that mentoring that happened. So let's start with this strategy for informal mentoring. Because as I mentioned, informal, you don't have the outcomes, you don't have the goals, you don't have a set schedule. My recommendation here is to be very proactive when you're seeking out opportunities to connect. My example of the person who was like an informal mentor to me because we had breakfast at the same time in the break room, that was very informal. And we were able to connect there all the time because of breakfast. But if we had not sought each other out, those conversations really would not have happened. So, how can you go about doing this if you're looking to become better with informal mentoring? First, I would say if you're in an informal mentoring relationship or partnership, if you will, offer support when you can, but don't force it. To tell you a quick story about this, at my previous job, I was a senior trainer and we hired on some junior trainers. And as they got started, I was very excited for them, and I wanted to give them all the knowledge about the team and what I'd learned in all this. And as they were being onboarded, part of my role was to train them. And then I would say to them, if you have any questions about XYZ, just let me know, and I'm more than happy to help. And that was what I did. What I did not do was continue to go back to them day after day and say, like, do you need help with this? Do you need help with this? And there's definitely a balance. You do want to be someone who's offering support, but sometimes if you're coming across too strong, that can cause a mentee to kind of shut down and not want to come to you when there's something that they absolutely need. And as a result of me kind of making it clear that I was there for help, but not forcing it, that allowed them to come to me when it was something that they needed. Along those lines, you definitely want to be open and approachable, especially when it comes to interns and junior members of your team. Quick note about this here, and this is something I always, always, always like to stress when it comes to this item. When I say junior members, I mean junior in terms of their seniority level and not necessarily age. It's a very common thing that I've seen where someone who may be older in age but junior in skill level comes into a position, and other members of the team will look at that person and think, oh, well, they're older, they have a lot more career experience, they don't need my help, I need to help the people who are fresh out of college. I would actually say, in fact, from my experience, people who are career changers, especially who do have who do have work experience in other areas, but may be newer to a certain industry, they need that help definitely because of this misconception that they already know something. So just to kind of tie that up, if you do have people on your team who are career changers, please do include them when you are thinking of these informal mentoring opportunities. And being open and approachable, it helps a lot because I currently am the newest person on my team at AWS, and I know what it's like to be on the other side of things now, and it's been so reassuring to know that there are members of the team who are saying, hey, if you need help, I'm here, or feel free to send me a chat message anytime. And to be able to follow up with that, it's helped to open up larger conversations about mentoring and career pathing. The next one, I don't know if any of you have ever done internal like speed networking before, but it's kind of fun to do. It's like speed dating, but with HR and snacks and things like that. The way that can work is if you have an internal company event, you might have like a table set up where people sit on either side of the table, and then you might spend about 3 minutes talking to each person before you go on to the next one. And there, ideally, if you do this, it can be helpful to have a list of questions that question conversation starters. Things like, tell me about the department you work in, or what has your career path been to get to this point, or what's a project that you're working on right now. It seems really cheesy, believe me, it is. But from a couple jobs ago when I did this, there was someone that I met through an internal speed networking event. I was relatively low on the scale at that company. She was a director, and our paths probably never would have crossed had it not been for this event. But the work that she was doing seemed pretty interesting to me, and so after that event, we stayed in touch, very informal. And then a few months later, there was an opening on her team, and guess who she reached out to give a heads up? And that was a promotion that I was able to get. And all of this because of this internal speed networking. So again, you're looking for opportunities where you can be proactive about connecting. Last thing here is, regardless of how you integrate these different strategies here, I do encourage you to let that relationship be driven by the mentee. That can be a really important part of their professional growth and development, and it gives them that responsibility for reaching out to you and making sure that they are continuing that conversation, that they are reaching out for help when they need it, because it helps drive their growth. And I know it can be a little bit uncomfortable. Believe me, I know I've been on that side before, but definitely let them drive that. On the other side, with formal mentoring, this is where you're going to start with your end goals in mind. As I mentioned, formal mentoring is where you have a lot of that structure. You have goals that are specified, you have outcomes that are being tracked. So, why is it that I'm saying start with the end goals in mind first? This is so you can build a formal mentoring program that is really solid, and that the mentors who are involved with this know exactly what it is that they're expected to do, and why it is that they're doing this. If you're not familiar with backward design, it's something that I first came across when I was in my teacher residency program. This chart here comes from the book that you see referenced at the bottom, Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTighe. The opposite approach of this is what you often see, where if someone is planning a lesson, for example, they might sit down and say, oh, I really want the kids to use this new computer app for multiplication. Let's have them do that. But what's the point of that? What are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve? So instead of starting with that approach first, backwards design is an approach where you start by identifying your results initially. You think, what do we want to ultimately get out of this? Once you know what those desired results are, you take another step and determine what kind of evidence could you potentially have that can help you to see those results there. And only once you've done steps 1 and 2 do you then go to planning that, in this case, the mentoring program. So rather than saying, we're going to have people mentor and talk with each other, you think, why are we doing this? What are the results that we want to see? And what kind of evidence can we have that could possibly support this? So formal mentoring, you want to start by defining your purpose and timeline. And I'll preface this by saying I know it can feel like a lot of upfront work, but I promise you, if you're looking to improve your skills as a formal mentor, starting here is going to really do a lot of that work for you. So some purposes that you might see with formal mentoring could be technical mentoring, like if someone is specifically trying to level up their technical skill set. You could have someone who's trying to get into career mentoring to progress to a higher grade band, or even leadership mentoring, like if someone is intentionally trying to get into a management position at some point in their career. Starting with the why is really going to help you figure out why you're doing this, because then once you started there, you can move into figuring out exactly how the effectiveness of this program is going to be measured. that this is something that can help you not just for the current iteration of that mentoring program, but if you're deciding that you want to do this again after the program has concluded, having evidence and data is going to allow you to be able to see what worked well, what could be improved, what's something else that we haven't considered that we can be bringing into this to make it better. So some ways that you could measure the effectiveness of your mentoring program could be things like you see here, like a competency assessment, like a before and after, seeing if someone's skill level has improved, and if so, by how much. Perhaps you're incorporating a mentoring program into your workplace because you want to improve retention rates for employees, or if someone is being coached for improved job performance. Also, make sure that you're setting regular check-in intervals. And this is something that you do want to be mindful of, especially if you are doing a mentoring program that is with employees who are at your company for a short term, like interns, for instance. I know summer is coming up soon-ish. Well, it's Chicago. I live in Chicago, so who knows when it might happen. But let's say when the summer comes up and you have interns for 3 months, you might not want to say let's meet monthly, because you meet 3 times with your interns and then they're gone. Perhaps for something like that, you could say let's meet every other week or weekly, depending on what works best for you. Even if it's not something short term like that, it is helpful to set expectations as to how often mentors are expected to meet with their mentee, so that they can stick to that cadence and know, be able and to know how to be able to structure out their plan for working together. And repeating this again here because it still applies. Let that relationship be driven by the mentee. To tell you a quick story about this, I was once the mentee in a formal mentoring program. And after I first met my mentor, and we hit it off, and everything's great, and I'm feeling very excited about this. The last thing she said to me was, "Okay, Olivia, go ahead and set some time on my calendar for our first official meeting." Yo, I froze. I freaked out. I mean, she didn't know this, but I was panicking because at that point in my career, I was still very junior. I had only ever had calendar invitations come to me. I was the one who accepted them. I had never before needed to set a calendar event on an executive's schedule. And looking back, it sounds like a very minor thing. And I don't know if this was intentional on her part. Knowing her, it probably was. But I appreciate that she did that, because that small step forward was something, it was very symbolic of me as the mentee being the one taking ownership for my success in this mentoring program. So, what have we done so far? We've talked about identifying specific skills and deciding on a formal or informal mentoring approach. Now, what comes next? Well, this is where we're getting into communication. And as I was planning this, I tried to think about if I could give someone advice for how to become a better communicator in the context of mentoring. What's the one piece of advice? And this is what I settled on: the idea that you need to listen before you speak. I know for myself, when I first got started with mentoring, I thought about it from the standpoint of, I have all this knowledge that I want to impart on someone else. They're going to sit across from me and I'm going to talk, and they are going to listen and absorb the knowledge. But it's really not like that. What I'm going to show you over this next section is how so much of the foundation of strong communication with mentoring comes from listening within these 4 communication phases. We're going to break it down into active listening, then paraphrasing, clarifying, and then lastly, giving feedback. The reason that I've bolded giving feedback down there is that as we go throughout this section, I want you to think about, what role does active listening play in giving feedback? Similarly, how can paraphrasing help you to give better feedback? And how can clarifying help you when it comes to giving feedback? So active listening looks like this, right? I know when I first got started with active listening, I kind of overdid it and may have scared some people by staring at them, but it really does not look like this. But what you do want to do instead when you're actively listening is to first be very mindful of your body language. And this is something I just noticed that I kind of set up as I did this right now. Not that I've been slumping this whole time, but being mindful of your body language can be something even so small as the way that you orient yourself to the person who's speaking. Like, think about it as if you're having a conversation with someone and it's the two of you, you're talking and listening, it makes a difference if you are just kind of turned away from them versus you are physically orienting your body to them. So, a small thing, but it can really help your mentee to see and feel and believe that you're there and you're being present. Also, be encouraging and open. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Olivia, we're listening. So, how can you be encouraging and open when you're not saying anything? A lot of this comes back to how you are looking when you are showing that you're actively listening. So little things like nodding, smiling, just being there, being present is really the foundation of this, because when your mentee comes to you and they're speaking with you, you want them to feel that you are valuing their time and that you're present in the moment and that they are your number one priority right then and there. When you're in these discussions, sometimes what will happen is that you are needing to move into the paraphrasing and the clarifying to get more understanding. I was thinking just the other day about this daytime talk show that I used to watch many years ago, and the host meant well. She really did, but she had this presentation style where when her guest was there on the show with her, the talk show host would just ask a list of questions and never really engage with that person. So she might ask the guest, so tell me about the project that you're working on now, and the guest would talk about their new movie or something like that. And then the host, instead of saying, oh, well, that's great, let's talk more about this, she would just move on to the next question. And it was very disjointed. And to get around this and to communicate in a better way, paraphrasing is what I recommend. Because with this, you're restating the other person's thoughts from a different angle. I really recommend using these sentence starters that you have here in case this is something that you might struggle with. And full confession, there are times, or there have been times, when I, as a mentor, would have these written on post-it notes in front of me. My mentee couldn't see them, but I had it in a way so that as they were speaking, and I'm thinking, all right, I'm really struggling with paraphrasing, how can I ask about this? I would be able to then move on and say, oh, what I hear you saying is, or, okay, as I understand it, you're feeling, or it sounds like you're saying that, dot, dot, dot. It is absolutely okay to use these to help you, because what it does, it gives you the words to be able to just kind of let your mentee know that they've been heard and that you understand them. But what if you don't understand what they were talking about? Sometimes you need to clarify. And it's okay to ask questions like, what do you mean by this? Or can you tell me more about? Even as a technical trainer, there have been times when people have asked me questions during a training session and they'll say, oh, Olivia, tell me about that thing, that thing over there. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what they're talking about. And earlier in my career, I would try to wing it and just go with it. But I think it's really essential to ask these clarifying questions because it gives you the understanding to be able to really address their need. I've highlighted this one at the bottom. How do you feel about something? Because suppose someone comes to you and they're your mentee and they're saying that they're working on a new project. So if you were to say, oh, you're working on your first project, you must be so excited. And they say, well, I'm kind of terrified. You never want to assume that you know how your mentee is feeling about something, because they could be a little bit nervous. They could be a little bit anxious. So instead, it's okay to say, hey, I know you've got your first project coming up. How do you feel about that? And even your tone there can really be essential, because saying like, well, how do you feel about that? It gets into the linguistics of this, but I think being more open and giving your mentee that space to be able to be honest about how they're feeling can really help you understand how to go when it comes to the next part, which is giving feedback. I know this is a stock photo, but I put it in here because I love it. It reminds me of some of my mentors that I've had throughout my career. And you can see these things I was talking about: eye contact, having that body language that's oriented towards each other. And giving feedback is something that, we could do a whole separate session on that. But to distill it into a few quick points here: empathy. Consider your mentee's perspective. Think about where it is that they're coming from, why it is that they may have done something in a certain way. And I know you may be coming from many years of experience, but really try to put yourself in their shoes and think, oh yeah, that's kind of how I felt when I was starting early in my career. I can understand more clearly now why it is they might have done that. You also want to be very specific and direct when you're giving feedback to them, and do this in a kind way. And I know that can be a tough balance to strike sometimes, but I say be direct and specific, because what you don't want to do is give feedback that's so nebulous and just kind of talking around a concept that the mentee walks away and they're thinking, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do now. With that being said, when you're offering suggestions, make sure to explain why that's something that they should do. So, for example, if I'm mentoring someone who's a junior software developer and I'm trying to get them to understand why they should include comments in their lines of code, I might say, for instance, when you're so for your next project that you're working on, I'd recommend make sure to include the comments in there. That can be really helpful for not only you when you're looking over your code again, but also it's helpful for your other team members when they need to read and interpret your code too. So what happened there? You give them the suggestion as to what to do, but you also follow it up with the why. I know personally there have been many times when I think back on feedback that I've been given, and the main reason that I remember to do it is because I remember the why. So it's a really great way to ensure that your mentee has as much context as possible. Okay. So just to recap, as we're getting into our final section here, this is what we've covered so far: skills and strengths, formal, informal, listening before you speak. But now we're getting into how to acknowledge your fears and create a path forward. Sam, would you mind loading up the second poll? So the question here is, which of the following fears related to mentoring can you most relate to? Can you most relate to lacking strong communication skills, not having enough time, or feeling that you're too much of a beginner yourself? And then Sam, you can let me know once once people have voted.
Great. It looks like a majority of our folks here have voted, and coming in first with 47% of the vote is not having enough time. 33% of our attendees voted on feeling that you're too much of a beginner yourself, and then 20% said lacking strong communication skills.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Let me go back to, let's just, before I go and double check. Sam, are you able to see the
Looks
slides
great.
again? You are?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I will take just a couple minutes to go through this because I know we're just about at the end here. For those of you who feel that you're lacking strong communication skills, the items I would recommend for you would be, you can start by writing. If you are working at a company that has like a chat-based communication system like Slack, Google Chat, that can be a great way to write your ideas down so that you don't feel that you're getting tongue-tied, but you're still able to offer guidance in that written medium. I also recommend attending local meetup events that are related to not only your professional interests, but your personal ones. One of my ways that I've improved this myself, I have a group of friends, we do crafting, and by speaking with them about cross stitching and knitting, that's helped me to improve my communication skills also in a professional context. And also, don't overthink it. Please do remind yourself that you absolutely have something to offer to other people, even if it's quick tips here and there sprinkled throughout. Now, the one about time, and I know that's the one that most of you voted for. I completely agree. I'm in that situation myself right now when it comes to mentoring and how much I can personally take on. What I recommend for mentoring, if you don't have enough time, definitely focus more on the informal side. You probably are not going to be able to take on the formal side of things, but I would say it is absolutely okay. Ask questions to get some clarification about how much that time commitment would be. I know sometimes people can be hesitant to do that because they think that they don't have enough time, but if you can ask the organizer and say, hey, realistically speaking, how much of a commitment is this? How much am I expected to have to do with this mentoring program? And also, do be realistic and honest about how much you're able to offer. There have been times before where I may not have been able to have enough time to commit to the full aspect of a formal mentoring program, but I was able to offer my services kind of like a free agent for someone who needed quick mentoring sessions here and there. So, for those of you who do feel that you don't have enough time, definitely start with some of these more informal opportunities, like micro mentoring, if you will. And that also lends into if you feel that you're too much of a beginner yourself, informal is going to be probably the best way for you to go as well. Soft skills mentoring, like communication, creative thinking, and teamwork, coaching and mentoring people on these topics is a really good way to get some mentoring experience, even if you don't have enough time, even if you're thinking, I don't have enough of a technical skill set, but perhaps you do know quite a bit about time management that you can give to someone else. And finally, I encourage you to continue to build your skills and then move on to teaching other people what you've learned, because this learning and mentoring, it's an ongoing cycle that can really help you and your mentee. As we're wrapping up, these slides will be shared out with you, and there's a few resources here that I think could be really helpful as you're getting started with mentoring and looking into different aspects of mentoring, such as mentorship in tech and something that's near and dear to my heart, mentoring women in tech as well. In summary, here's what we covered today. Identify skills and strengths that are specific. You want to seek out those opportunities to connect, be proactive, and start with those end goals in mind. With communication, listen before you speak. Be very active with listening and make sure your mentee really understands that you hear them. And finally, acknowledge those mentoring fears and use some of those strategies to create a path forward. So as we wrap up and get into the Q&A, just want to return to where we started here and just remind you that becoming a better mentor, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that takes practice, but as you go forward, I really encourage you to think about it like this. It's not a sprint, it's a lifelong journey, or as some people might say, an odyssey. Thank you. I just
Thank
want
you so
clapping for
much,
myself.
Olivia. Yes. Oh, we'll all clap for you. We're all clapping while we're muted up here.
Thank you. No worries.
We do have a couple of questions, and I want to be mindful of time, but I think we've got about 5 minutes or so here. So here, a first question from one of our attendees. At work, I've been told to be a mentor. It was a formal mentoring situation, and I have been an effective mentor before. I really tried to be kind, attentive, and receptive. The mentee, however, wasn't interested in working with me, listening to me. We weren't meeting the specified goals for the team. What should I have done?
Mm. Yeah, that is, let me go back to the slide about formal mentoring here. Yeah, that is, I'm so sorry that you had that experience there. And that is, so just to kind of recap, you said that formal mentoring program, you as the mentor, you were really involved with it, but the mentee just wasn't kind of meeting their expectations of it. I would say in that case, Sam, did the question specify if there was like a mentor program coordinator at all or anything like that?
Did not specify. No, it just said it was a formal mentoring situation.
Okay. Yeah, in that case, this is where it can be really tricky when it comes to like having to correct the behavior that you're seeing there. If there's an organizer for the mentoring program, I would go back to them just to check in. Even if things are going really well, I would say set that expectation of just going to them and letting them know how things are and giving them just the observations that you're seeing, like saying, hey, I've been doing X, Y, and Z. unfortunately the mentee has not been fulfilling their responsibilities in this way. What would you recommend? Also, depending on how the program is structured, possibly going to their manager could be another venue to explore, but that can be a little iffy depending on how your org is structured, just because you don't want to make your mentee feel as though you are like tattling on them or reporting them or something like that. But it could be a good way just to check in with the manager and say, hey, I'm really excited about working with so and so. It seems like they've got a lot of potential in this area. Just want to check and see and give you a heads up though that they haven't been as responsive in this area. Do you know why that might be? And it could be that they just got a big project put on their plate that you don't know about or something like that. But I would say, however you decide to approach it, make it clear that you're coming from a place of empathy and compassion, that you're not trying to be harsh to the mentee. You're just trying to get more information about what their situation is and what maybe their preferred working style is so that you can adjust as needed and just kind of meet them where they are. Because sometimes the mentee might not feel comfortable with telling you that, but you can try to get that info to help them. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Here's another question. How would body language across a remote mentoring opportunity work, i.e. through a computer screen? Any tips?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Especially now, for myself, I work with a team that's fully remote, and that is something that I know can be a little bit tricky when it comes to assessing someone's body language, like especially if they don't have their camera turned on. I would say thinking about your team's culture and norms. Generally, from what I've seen, having a culture of cameras on can be really helpful with that, with getting a sense of their body language and being present, making sure that people aren't trying to multitask and do 10 things when they're with that video call. And this is something where I've had to have discussions in previous organizations about this, where being on a team where people were remote and on this conference call together, but they weren't fully present. And it's something where you want to say, I'm not calling you out on this, but just let's all try to be present when we're on these calls together, even though I know it's remote. We're not multitasking, we're there together. And I think that when you set that expectation, it really does help to improve the overall body language, because you see people like less fidgeting on the side and you're really able to focus there. So that would be my recommendation, setting that as a team-wide expectation, and less of, Joe, why do you keep doing this? You're not calling out one person.
Great. We probably have time for about two more questions. So
Okay.
here's one. How do you mentor up informally for those
Mhm.
who you work with that you strongly feel and need help to manage or mentor down? How do you manage that relationship?
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario. And the from what I've seen in my experience, one of the best things to do from the beginning is just kind of acknowledge, I don't want to say the awkwardness, but acknowledge that there is that seniority difference there. And for the person who is in the higher level, I think it really helps if they can be open and say, you know what, I appreciate the help that you're offering to me. Like, as much as you are able to take away the seniority levels in that dynamic, that's when you're able to focus on the work that you're trying to get done there. I've seen this happen from the other side, where someone who was in a more senior level was very reluctant to the feedback that they were given, because they kept saying, oh, well, I'm a senior, I know more than you. But it goes from both sides. So it really, a lot of it does come down to the person, the mentee who's in that higher level, being open to getting that feedback. But also for you as the mentor, what you can say is, I really appreciate you taking the time to work with me. I, um, I know that you're seeking out help in areas XYZ, and let me just tell you a little bit about my experience in these areas so that you can kind of see what I'm bringing to the table. So I don't want to say it's like you have to overly prove yourself, but as much as you can be transparent and say, regardless of your level, you've got something to offer, and hopefully that other person will be receptive to that.
Great. And we've got time for one more. In informal
Mhm.
mentoring relationships, people often choose mentees that remind them of themselves. If I
Mm.
don't look like or come from the same background as the people in power, how do I overcome that?
Mm. So the question again was, with informal mentoring, people often kind of go with people who are like them. And Sam, can you repeat the last part of that question one more time? I'm clarifying.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So if I don't look like or come from the same background as people in power, how do I overcome that?
Yeah, that is, yeah, okay. Thank you. I've kind of been there before myself, that like as a Black woman in tech, often the people who are in leadership positions that I've been mentored by do not look like me. And so what I like to do in that case, I focus on, even if it's informal, I like to pull in some of these things that I've got on the slide right here. And I think, what exactly am I hoping to get out of this experience? And I might come to someone and say, I'm looking to become better at solutions architecture, and this is something that I know that you are really experienced with. Can you help me with that? And I think that if the more that you're able to focus in specifically on what you're hoping to have that person help you with, the more that you're able to start establishing that connection there. And it's less of, well, I'm a junior, you're more of a senior executive, help me. And because that can feel a little bit uneasy, especially if they don't look like you and there's not that connection there. But if you're able to establish a connection that's based on something very specific and tangible, like saying, I see you're a manager, I want to be a manager someday, are you able to assist me with that? I think that can be a great way of establishing that initial bond and building from there.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone for participating, and a special thank you to Olivia for sharing her practical tips on this important topic.